Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are getting towards the end of February 2024. The year is now almost 1/6 of the way gone. Hard to believe we've gotten that far into the year. One thing to remember: February does have 29 days this year, so leap year. Don't be afraid to freak your friends out a little bit. Schedule a lunch or a dinner or some sort of meeting on the 29th. See if they think it's a joke. But hope everybody's doing well. One of the things I will mention, and I will mention this probably over the next month or so, it is pollen season here in North Carolina. And for anybody who's listened for a while knows that just like kryptonite, pollen is my arch enemy. It is my great weakness. It usually causes a little bit of, for me, head colds and all sorts of wonderful things. So apologize for any scratchy throats or, sort of coughing or whatever. We will do the best to edit all that kind of stuff out, but just be aware. Apparently the pollen season is coming fast and furious to North Carolina. Apparently it's a month ahead of schedule, which is miserable for me, but it is what it is. So anyways, as I mentioned a couple times on the show over the last month or so, I am, by this time, finishing up a month-long trip around the world. I was in Asia Pacific, I was in Europe, I was here in the States, and then I'm going to be down in South America. And I've been doing a bunch of keynote speaking for my work job, for my day job. And I thought it might be useful to, do a Sunday perspective on how do you go about building a keynote? What's a thought process to use if you're asked to give a keynote presentation, or even just a big presentation, a presentation to a large room, which is obviously different than if you're in a small group of people or you're presenting over Zoom. There's a lot that kind of goes into presenting to a large room or a large number of people, because not only are you, kind of being asked to present something bigger, present something that is intended to guide a lot of people, but there's a lot of sort of logistics to think about, some things to think about in terms of how do you properly fill the room? How do you make sure that you convey the right sort of things? And so I thought what I would do is kind of walk through some of the thought process that I've had. I've had a chance to do this a number of times in my career, and I thought it might be useful to kind of pass along some tips and tricks and some thought processes in terms of how do you go about thinking about the presentation? How do you go about building the presentation? What are some things to think about in terms of how you actually give the presentation? Not just presenting the slides or clicking through things, or which images should go in this pictures, all that sort of stuff. But I want to kind of walk through those things. I thought it would be useful to do. Is it something that, like I said, I've been doing for the last month or so, and it's something that as I think back on my career, there's a big difference between the ones that are very good and very memorable and the ones that are, are a little bit cringy. And honestly, the line between the two of them somewhat is the presentation itself, the subject and so forth. Some of it is the presenter, and some of it is just getting certain little nuances and certain tips and tricks right. And so thought I would pass along some things, and we're going to go do that right after the break. Are you getting pressure from finance to justify or reduce your cloud bill? CloudZero is the only cloud cost platform loved by engineers and trusted by finance. CloudZero can identify unused, idle, or over-provisioned resources, alert you to spend anomalies, and organize 100% of your spend into a framework that mirrors your business structure, like cost per customer, product feature, or team. It's the most powerful platform ever built to provide accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. Manage cost, optimize development, and maximize profit, all in one platform. Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Visit today to experience immediate and ongoing savings on your cloud bill. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to kind of walk through, or at least I'm going to walk through the thought process of building a keynote presentation or a presentation for kind of a large audience. So larger audience, larger room, might be 100 people, might be 1,000 people, depends obviously what you're working on. But I'll walk you through the process. This is something that I've used a number of times. I've seen different people have different approaches because to a certain extent, if you're building Keynote, typically, you're not doing the kind of corporate thing where somebody built a presentation for you and you're just giving it. Typically, you're kind of the creator of it. So you do the normal thing that you do with any sort of creative process in terms of, okay, I'm staring at a blank sheet of paper or a blank PowerPoint slide or whatever you use to create with. Anyways, I tend to look at them in terms of, so first and foremost, I tend to look at them as if I'm telling a story. And there's lots of different ways to tell a story, but ultimately, you're going to have 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it might be, 20 minutes. And these people are, you're trying to put yourself in the head of, who's going to be attending, what's the audience look like, what kind of things are they interested in? But you're also trying to balance it with the idea that, you were asked to give this type of presentation for a reason, right? So I tend to think of it as a story. It doesn't always come out as a story, but I say I think about it as a story because stories tend to have sort of a logical beginning, middle, and end. They tend to introduce new things. They tend to give you a reason why those things were introduced. Typically, there's some sort of conflict that's being resolved, and then there's some sort of ending or some sort of next step. So I tend to think about it in terms of story. Now, in terms of the type of story that you might want to build, there's lots of different ways you can do it, right? You can kind of go with the hero and villain type of approach where, you create a problem, you create a villain that you're trying to trying to resolve the problem. You're trying to vanquish the villain, if you will. And then you create sort of the other side of it, which is sort of create a hero, right? So this is oftentimes how a lot of product-centric type of keynotes are, right? We create a problem, we create something that people can relate to in terms of this is bad, this costs you too much money, this costs you too much time and hassle, and this thing, the hero, comes in and fixes that. So that's one approach, the sort of good versus evil type of approach. The second type of approach that people often use is what I'll call the sort of the preacher's trick, which is something we see in religion with preachers, when they do their sermons. Essentially, what they do is they're going to tell you what they're going to talk about. Then they go and tell you what what the thing is, and then they go and finish it up and they tell you, kind of repeat what they talked about. So tell them what you're going to tell them, and then repeat again what you told them so they remember it, right? So sort of a three-part thing that we call sort of a preacher's trick. Another way you can do it, you can use an analogy. You can put your story in the context of something else. Oh, this is like Moby Dick. This is like, some, Greek mythology type of thing. This is like, a scene from Star Wars, whatever it might be. You can use sort of an analogy to something that people are familiar with, right? That's a common way of doing it. And then sometimes people do it purely as educational, right? They are, they're basically saying, look, I have knowledge that I want to share with you, and I've organized it in a way that even though it is a vast amount of knowledge, I'm going to sort of narrow it down. So think of it as sort of the Cliff Notes version or the TLDR version of some big amount of information, and you're going to, kind of do an educational approach. So there's lots of different ways you can go about doing it. Those are a few that I see pretty frequently and that I've used in the past. But the first thing I typically say is, organize what you're trying to do as if it's a story so that it has a beginning, middle, and an end. It has a way in which the audience can place themselves into that story so they feel a part of it. And you are sort of guiding them think of it as like the narrator throughout the story. The second thing you're often trying to do is, like I said, you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of the audience, right? Who are these people, right? How much do you know about them? What's their type of job? What types of things are important to them? What are they expecting to get out of it? So, you write a title for your talk and you have an abstract, and so they sort of go in thinking certain things. You want to kind of think through, well, if I wrote the title as, 10 ways to, get rich quick or something, I probably don't want to tell them about, how to, dig mud out of a trench or something, right? You want to make sure you're pretty well aligned to that thing they're expecting, because people come into these things and they have certain expectations. There's a certain amount of unknown and blank space that you can fill in, but, you want to make sure you align to that. And then you want to think about, what, if you were in the audience, what would you kind of want to get out of this, right? Are you hoping to be motivated? Are you hoping to learn something? Are you trying to get educated about something that you didn't know about? Are you just sort of there to, hear something new and different, right? So you're kind of trying to think through that. So you've got that. You've got a sense of like, what's the framework of what I'm trying to do? What's the audience sort of expecting? And then you're trying to find a balance between those two things, right? So suppose you get the presentation done, you get however you're going to go about doing it. If it's, we've all seen tons and tons of different keynotes. Some of them are very formal. They are the, kind of corporate built ones where it's a lot of what look like stock photographs with like one word over the top of it. Others are, technical diagrams because you're presenting something that is sort of new and novel. Some of them are some combination of, some slides with a certain amount of information in them. Some of them are going to be, some animation to help you understand some concepts. Sometimes you introduce a demonstration. All those things are valid, right? So however you go about wanting to present the thing that you want to present, they can all be valid. It could be nothing but, GIFs and memes. It can be nothing but, I've seen, nothing but like one word on the slide. I've seen nothing but just images of, the concepts that you're trying to get across. So you can go about doing it in any sort of way. But you want to go about doing that. Now, once you've got that in place, and we could do a whole session on like how to build presentations and what you should do and shouldn't do. And that's a whole different thing, right? There are people who do that professionally. I do a lot of them, but that's not the right medium for an audio podcast. So let's assume you have all that stuff in place. The next thing you want to do is you go, okay, I'm presenting this, I'm getting ready to present this. So now we start to get into, how do you give the presentation? How do you fill the room properly? How do you go about making sure that the experience is really good, right? So the first thing you sort of have to ask yourself is, are you bringing the right level of energy into the room, right? So, this is where if you haven't done it before, it is very different, right? If you've presented on Zoom, half the people are asleep, they're not paying attention. If you presented in a small room, it feels pretty personal. You're going to sort of speak normally. When you present in a large room, the first thing you have to realize is that while you have a microphone and you're amplified, you have to bring a level of energy that fills the room, right? And the simplest way to think about this is you need to probably bring somewhere between 50% to 100% more energy than you feel like you need. You're going to feel it to do it properly and to convey the right level of enthusiasm and so forth to the audience, especially depending on what you're trying to do. But assuming you're trying to motivate them or so on and so forth, you're probably going to need it's going to feel like 50% to 100% more energy than you think it is. And it's going to feel at least 50% more loud than you think it is, right? So think about this. Almost maybe the simplest way to think about this is if you've ever had to explain something to somebody and you feel like they're not getting it or they're talking back to you and you feel like the best way I can explain this to you is I'm going to raise my voice to a level where I'm over the top of you. And you're not doing this in an angry way, but if you've ever had sort of a disagreement where you feel like maybe you're talking to your kids or you're talking to somebody, that level that you take your voice up to in terms of volume is typically the easiest way for you to first get a sense of like, oh, that's where I need to be at for the whole thing because I have to fill the entire room. And I don't say that in an easy way. I don't mean that sort of play that off like, oh, that's just a thing. First and foremost, it's sort of a trick that anybody who's done theater will have learned. They teach you how to project your voice, how to bring a kind of a bass to your voice, if you will. But your energy is the energy that the entire room is going to feed off of. And so if you're just kind of doing the normal, basic conversation as if you're like, well, I'm just talking, but I'm amplified, they're going to get no energy because your energy it dissipates in that big room. It doesn't happen on Zoom. It doesn't happen in a small room, but in a big room, it dissipates, right? Okay. The next thing you have to figure out is, are you trying to educate? Are you trying to motivate? Or are you trying to introduce new ideas? Because depending on what you're trying to do is going to set the tone and the pace at which you present, right? So if you're trying to educate, you're probably going to go a little slower, but you're going to make sure that you emphasize certain things, that you pause on certain things, and that you highlight, okay, this is how this complex thing happens. This is where I'm going to slow down because this is something new to people and so forth. So if you're educating, it's going to be a certain pace and a certain tone. If you are motivating, think about any motivational speech you've ever said in, you're going to bring a different level of energy. You're going to realize that the words sometimes mean a little less than you kind of reaching into somebody's, emotions and trying to amplify those and get them excited about something. You're trying to create an idea that seems very exciting to people and maybe seems a little bit out of reach for them, to where they feel like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to sort of expend myself a little bit to get to that thing. But the outcome, the possibilities of that are big, right? So, that's going to be different than an educational type of thing. And if you're introducing a new idea, that's a whole different type of tone and pace and so forth, because you're not talking about something that they understand. You're talking about something that's very brand new to them, right? And so, you have to think about what's new. What have they ever compared this to before? Do I need to make the comparisons for them? What do people typically think of when they see this thing? Oh, that creates a negative emotion. That creates a positive emotion. That creates an unknown. You have to take all those things into consideration. So again, that's the combination of sort of energy that you bring to the room and the style and pace that you bring to the room. So next thing is you're trying to figure out, what sort of empathy do I have with this audience, right? What am I expecting the audience interaction to be? Am I creating something in which I recognize that, people in the room are frustrated, that they're angry, they have a common problem, and I'm here to solve that problem? And if that's the case, you're going to have a certain level of empathy because you're trying to convey the idea that, hey, I can help you get better. I can help you solve the problem. I can help make something improve from where you are, right? Maybe the audience feedback you're really looking to just kind of get is nodding heads. You're looking to, recognize verbally, non-verbally, people get it, right? Maybe you're looking for a show of hands. Maybe you are asking for an audible call out. Does anybody get this? Yes, I get it. Does anybody ever had this problem? Raise your hand. And maybe you're just, you're realizing that this is, a topic that is sort of interactive, and you're throwing in some jokes, you're throwing in some funny things, you're throwing in some things where you're hoping to get a laugh, or you're trying to get some sort of audible reaction out of the audience. So that's another thing that you want to kind of factor in is, what's my relationship with the audience going to be? Again, am I really educating? Am I motivating? Am I trying to teach new things? How do I break up monotony? How do I break up long sections of stuff? You want to sort of take all those things into consideration, right? Now, the next thing that you're having to figure out, and this often goes back to when you're building the presentation itself, but when you think about the audience, what is the level of the audience, right? And how well does the level of the audience match with the content that you're presenting? So in our world, oftentimes the thing that we think about is a presentation, is the audience technical? Am I presenting technical things? And is this a technical audience? Or is this more of a business audience, right? Do they really not care too much about the nuances and the details of the technology, how it works, but they want to know, well, what are the results of that? How complicated is it to implement? How safe will this make me, or less safe? Or how much does this allow us to move into new innovation things? And so this is another thing that you're trying to figure out is, I want to make sure that the content I have matches the audience. And then oftentimes the most difficult thing for any of us in our industry is that it's very rare that you get a singular audience, right? You get all engineers, right? And there's going to be some cases where that happens, right? Maybe you go to a technical conference and you're giving a talk on, debugging Java for whatever. You're probably going to get mostly Java developers who, do hands-on work and have lived in this and have that problem. But if you're giving a keynote, the odds are you've got a pretty mixed bag of audience. You're going to have some technical people. You're going to have some technical people who are very in-depth, others that are very, kind of paper thin, they're new to something. You're going to have some business leaders who are responsible for technology. And this is where you then have to sort of say, okay, this is where the idea of storytelling or the idea of having sort of phases to your story really come into play. Because the first thing you want to do, or really the last thing you want to do, is alienate some chunk of your audience immediately. So for example, if you know, well, I have a mixed audience, some's technical, some's not technical, the last thing you want to do is say, well, I'm going to dive right into the deep end and I'm going to go right in with this technology, because you're going to lose all those non-technical people. What you typically want to do is go, okay, I'm going to give them at least enough of the basics to make sure that they get the concept, and they may very quickly realize like, okay, I got the concept, but this is too deep for me. And they're going to kind of check out. But at least you've given them something to remember the presentation by, something to then say, okay, I was with one of my technical colleagues. Some of that was interesting to me. I should ask them questions about it, right? So typically you want to create some sort of baseline so that everybody in the audience has some understanding of what you're talking about, some relatability to what you're talking about. And then if really the purpose of the talk is to go into more technical depth, for example, or to go into more business depth, that you provide that for the broader sense of the audience, right? So, it makes it hard when you've got a mixed audience. This is where you typically have to figure out, how do I do both interesting content, but then also some audience interaction, some audience empathy. For the people in the room that are business people, does that make any sense, right? Does that help? Okay, let me reiterate that a little bit. Okay, for the technical people, I know that, so far it's been pretty basic, but stick with me. We're going to go in depth on this. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a baseline, right? So you want to do some things like that. Now, the next thing to think about that oftentimes you don't think about if you're presenting in a keynote or some large thing is that you're on a pretty fixed schedule, right? You're typically, it's like talk starts at 10 in the morning, talk is done by 10:50, and people are going to then leave and go to the next session or go get a cup of coffee. And so you want to start figuring out, okay, timing wise, what do I have to figure out? So if on the calendar, on the schedule, I have 50 minutes, what does that really mean? Well, it typically means you want to buffer a couple of minutes at the beginning for people coming in late, for previous sessions running late. You kind of want to get to where the audience is seated and they're kind of settled. They're not having conversation. They're not still looking for seats and all that sort of stuff. So you probably got to figure 2 to 3 to 5 minutes off the front end you're going to lose, and then you got to figure out, okay, at the end, is this an interactive type of keynote? Am I going to take questions at the end? Is there something that has to happen towards the end? And so if you're taking questions, you want to buffer 5 or 10 minutes for some questions, right? However long you think you want to take questions, it depends on the topic. So that might be 5 or 10 minutes at the end that you're going to buffer off. So, maybe you started with 50 minutes, you take off 5 minutes at the beginning for people getting seated and being ready. Maybe you take off 5 to 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. And so that leaves you with, call it 30, 35 minutes or so. And then what you typically want to do is you want to go, okay, for 30 to 35 minutes, I'm going to have 2 to 3 minutes per slide that I present. And don't count the slides that have like your name or some sort of transition slide that's, a gap between them. But for the content that you present, 2 to 3 minutes is typically about what you are going to spend at a normal pace to sort of walk through an idea that's on a slide, right? So if you've got 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and you figure 2 to 3 minutes, that's going to put you in the 10 to 12, maybe 13, 14 slide range, right? And this is you speaking at the pace that makes the most sense. Some combination of sped up speech, slowed down speech, some pause and all those things. But you want to really make sure you get your timing right, because the last thing you want to do is feel like, okay, I spent a lot of time at the beginning making sure this concept worked, but to really bring this home, I got to rush through the last 8 slides. And if I rush through them, people aren't going to get things, right? So this is where you start thinking about, okay, maybe I can take a slide out. Maybe I can double up something. Maybe I can do something with a visual as opposed to trying to explain something. So that's the next thing you're trying to figure out, is making sure that you have the right amount of time, that you can, convey the ideas that you want at the pace that you want, but also do it at a pace in which people can consume it, that they can figure it out and learn it. Okay. Next thing, and this kind of goes back to slide making, but it also is the presentation part of it, is if you're introducing new ideas, right? If you're doing something that's brand new. So if you were simply talking about, some topic that everybody knows about, you're just kind of giving your opinion on it. Well, this is what I think about security and firewalls and hackers and DevSecOps, whatever. Well, okay, whatever. But if you're introducing something really brand new, so imagine, for example, you were trying to explain Kubernetes to somebody for the first time, or you're trying to explain, Dockers and containers for the first time. That's a pretty new concept, for at least, if you went back a number of years. Or if you're trying to explain generative AI to somebody in today's world. The thing you have to remember is, it's going to take people longer to do it, but there's a couple of other tricks to keep in mind. One is, some people are audible learners, so they learn from the word. Other people are visual learners. And so you want to try and realize that your audience is probably going to be a combination of both those things. And so the things that you present should be a combination of a decent visual behind you, i.e. the slide or a demonstration, and the right words to go with it. Because some people are going to hear you, and other people are just going to be reading the slide as what's behind you, and they're not going to take in everything you have. So you want to be, especially when you're presenting something new, you want to be friendly enough to your audience to realize that, again, just like they might be mixed technical and business, they might also be a mix of visual learners and audio learners or audible learners, right? The second thing is, if you are presenting something new, one of the things that's really important to do when you're presenting something new is to give them some frame of reference for something that they already know, right? So again, let's suppose you're presenting generative AI or Kubernetes or something. One of the things to do, and this is often hard to do if you think you've invented something brand new and it's, the world needs to know about your thing, is you have a tendency to just want to tell them what it is and how awesome it is. And if you want them to grasp why it's awesome, you oftentimes have to present it in the context of something they already know. And this is a little bit of a slippery slope, because sometimes people feel like, well, if I do that, then it feels like I'm bashing the thing that came before me, or I'm downplaying this thing that came before me. And there's a possibility that you do that if you do it the wrong way. But almost more importantly is you want to present it to people in a way that they can go, oh, okay, that's like a thing that I'm used to using or that we've used for 10 years. And it has all these known problems of which you are going to go about solving, or whatever the thing might be. So again, if you're presenting something new and you're doing it, I always think it's worth at least one slide or one mention of like, this is like this old mousetrap, but it's way better. And here's, 4 or 5 of the things that we're really going to focus on. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of wrap this up. We're getting sort of towards the end. A couple of other important things. If you are presenting to this large room, right, whether you are presenting motivational or inspirational or something new, or you're educating, there are going to be points in this that kind of define whether or not you were useful to be the presenter, right? Like why were you asked to speak to this? What uniqueness you have in this? And this is where you kind of have to realize your job at certain points in your presentation, even if you're not quote unquote selling something, you're not trying to get people to buy something, you're trying to sell a concept. And so think about, what are the 2 or 3 things within this presentation I'm trying to sell? I'm trying to convince people to buy into the idea, to explore the idea more, to learn more about it. Or maybe you're actually trying to sell something and you want to convey value of this thing or uniqueness of the thing. But think about, what are the 3 or 4 points in this, 2 or 3 points within your talk in which you're trying to sell something. And as you do that, make sure that the visuals that go with it are clear and concise about, this is important, pay attention. I want you to buy into this idea or to go explore this idea, and that your tone and your pace and your energy at those points, more than any other point in the talks, are bigger and more clear and more obvious and so forth. So there's going to be points that you need to sort of sell it. Now, just a couple of other things. Data is great within any sort of talk. It lends credibility to it. This problem is 50% less than this. This epidemic, this challenge that's happening in the world is 900% greater than it was 10 years ago. How did we get there? This trend has been going up 4% year over year, and you may not be realizing it, but we're getting to a point where this is going to be problematic. The use of data, the use of charts, it helps for those people that are analytically minded, right? It helps you sell the idea. It helps you validate an idea. It helps you have credibility. So don't be afraid to include data, to include charts. Again, know your audience, right? If you are presenting to a scientific conference, that's probably the core of what you're doing. But if you're presenting again to a mixed audience, realize that data is going to be really important for some of them. But the idea, the concept, the inspiration is going to be important for others. So figure out the right balance of using data, using the right kind of charts, and then as you get into that, there's lots of nuances of things you can learn about what's the right way to present data. How do you make it so that people can read it? Oftentimes, people are going to take pictures of it, so you want to make it memorable. All those sort of things. So, but data is very, very useful. And the last thing I'll throw in is, depending on what kind of thing you're presenting, demonstrations can be really useful. Because at the end of the day, I think about it just like Sunday Perspectives. So to a certain extent, you are forcing somebody to listen to you for a long period of time. Having things like data, having things like demonstrations, even having another person come on stage and co-present with you for small sections of it. Again, could be a presentation, could be a customer testimonial. Those are useful if for no other reason they break things up, but they can also be a really powerful way to to drive home an idea, to validate something, to just, break up the monotony of hearing one person talk, especially if that person, is just stuck standing in the middle of the room. They're not moving around the stage. They're not integrating, integrating with the audience, interacting with the audience, getting their feedback, having distractions and things like demonstrations are really useful. And again, those are great things to then go, oh, and we're going to put this on YouTube and you'll be able to see it and remember it. And you'll be able to, try it out with your customers and so forth. So, things like demonstrations, when used properly and used in the right way and done in the right way, can be great additive things to keynotes, even though they might be better served as a longer talk and 20 minutes of exactly how does this demonstration work and how do I answer all the questions with it. So, anyways, hopefully that's helpful. Lots of little things in there in terms of how do you build the story, how do you go about presenting it, how do you interact with the audience, how do you work through slow periods and long periods and timing and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully a lot of that's useful. Happy to, if anybody has to do a presentation, happy to, shoot us a note, show@thecloudcast.net, happy to review it, give you any feedback. But hopefully that was helpful. Like I said, I've done this a number of times, have done it well a number of times, have done it poorly a number of times. And Lord knows I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of keynotes and have, sort of been taking notes along the way. So hopefully this was helpful. Hope you all are doing well. Hopefully you are getting ready for March and spring and slightly better weather if you're in certain parts of the country where it's cold. And anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. And thanks for helping us grow the show and continuing to give us feedback. So with that, we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.